Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special video on our own devices. I'm Jean Messier, and I'm here in lovely Miami, Manitoba to give you an update on the Miami Bunker project. Now, as most of you know, for the past couple of years, I've been actively studying the Nuclear Detonation and Fallout Reporting System, or NDFRS, which was a system of small fallout shelters called Fallout Reporting Posts, or FRPs, built across Canada in the early 1960s to track the drift of radioactive fallout in the wake of a nuclear exchange. Now, in the process of this research, I partnered with the Miami Railway Station Museum to acquire, preserve, and display an authentic FRP, because there actually used to be one here installed on the grounds of the former railway station, but like all FRPs operated by the railroads, it was torn up in the 1970s. So back in November, I told you about how we found an intact FRP in Moose Lake, had it excavated, and brought here to Miami. And, well, over the past couple of months, myself, the museum staff and volunteers, and a number of local contractors have done a lot of work to help preserve this piece of Cold War history. And we've made a lot of progress. I wanted to keep you up to date on that. Now, our first priority was to create a new entrance for the public. See, these shelters originally would have been buried below ground level and accessed through that vertical shaft and ladder you see behind me. Now, that's not very safe. It's not very accessible. Goodness knows I've almost broken my leg several times trying to climb down one of those. So we decided instead to display the shelter above ground. We're going to bury it in a mound, so it's still buried, but at ground level. And we cut a new door at the opposite end of the shelter that people can just walk into. Our second priority was corrosion mitigation. So this shelter was found in extremely good condition. Only a couple of spots on the outside galvanization had actually corroded through in 60 years, leaving only a little bit of superficial rust. And so we ground off that rust, we coated the whole thing in cold galvanizing compound, and hopefully it will last another 60 years underground. And finally, we came to the interior, and most of the paint was actually intact. There was only a little bit of cracking and flaking here and there. But unfortunately, when we tested the paint, we found that, of course, it contained high levels of lead. So I used a pressure washer to clean off all the flaking paint so as not to create too much dust, and then coated the interior of the shelter using EcoBond, which is a special primer that seals in and neutralizes lead paint. Then I was able to paint the interior with regular latex outdoor paint matched to the original color. And so as you'll see in a second, the interior looks just as it would when the shelter was new. And then if I was able to track down or replicate nearly all of the equipment and supplies that these shelters would have been furnished with using original lists from the period. Now, NDFRS was shut down in 1963 before all of the FRPs were even installed, and none of them were actually fitted with their designated equipment. But we are trying to show what one of these would have looked like had the system gone operational. And it looks really, really cool. And I'm going to show you that in just a second. So the last couple of things that we need to do are a couple of interior details, as well as building the actual mound to bury the shelter. And so you can see here, we have our wooden retaining wall, which is going to help the mound have a smaller footprint and have steeper sidewalls. We're going to cover this in dirt. We're going to put some matting over top of it. We're going to plant prairie grass seed because the roots of prairie grasses are very deep. And so they're going to go down into the earth and consolidate it and stop this mound from washing away in the rain or blowing away in the wind. So hopefully it will last for many, many years. Now, I know that you're all waiting for me to show you the insides. That's what we're going to do right now. Welcome, everyone, to the restored interior of the Miami Bunker. Like I said, this is a Type B fallout reporting post, and these were designed to accommodate 2 volunteers for up to 2 weeks. And as you can see, these accommodations were very Spartan indeed. On this side, we have a pair of bunk beds, the lower one of which folds up for more storage space. And on this side, we have a set of shelves to hold all of our survival supplies. So we have some 5-man ration packs, which would have been standard issue for the Canadian military at the time. These are replicas that I produced using period photographs. We have our cooking utensils, including plates, bowls, saucepan, frying pan, basin, everything like that. Gas mask, civil defense first aid kit, paper towels, dustpan, broom, everything you would need to survive in here for 2 weeks. Moving back, we have a set of jerry cans for storing our water supply, as well as white gas for running a cooking stove and lanterns. And this is a bit of an educated guess on my part, because it wasn't able to find any information on how the government planned to store water in these shelters, but this seemed like a reasonable solution. However, these are not the correct types of jerry cans for this. These are for fuel, whereas the ones for water would have had a different spout and a plastic lining. So I'm going to try to get my hands on those and swap them out. Back here, we have our air pump, which would have moved fresh air into the bunker through a set of ventilation pipes. And this was nominally operated by an electric motor, but if the power went out, it also had a hand crank. Back here, we have a fire extinguisher and a fire blanket. And then we have our radiation detecting and reporting gear. So mounted on the wall here is our IM5015 remote monitoring radiac meter. This allowed you to measure outside radiation levels from safely inside the shelter. So you had a readout gauge here, and then a cable that went up the entrance shaft through a conduit and out to the surface, where it was connected to a measuring probe like this one mounted on a wooden post. However, the Canadian military very quickly ran out of these, and so most NDFRS fallout reporting posts would have been equipped with a handheld radiation detector like this IM108, requiring the volunteers to actually climb out that shaft and take their readings outside every hour, exposing them to radiation and allowing radioactive fallout to come into the shelter. Not a great plan. Now, radiation levels would have been measured every hour and then reported to a filter center, which would have processed the data and sent it off to Ottawa to be broadcast across the nation. And the different shelters use different forms of communication depending on which agency was operating the shelter. So, for example, the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, would have used the police radio network. The railroads would have used the railroad telegraph network, which actually ran through the rail lines, whereas all the other agencies would have used the regular telephone system. However, this was not a great plan because those telephone systems ran to central exchanges located in the very cities that would have been bombed, meaning that had this system become active, it probably would have been wiped out instantaneously the moment nuclear war broke out. And so this is one of the many contributing factors to NDFRS being canceled in 1963. In this case, I had to make a bit of an educated guess and got my hands on a Mark V field telephone, which was first deployed during the Second World War, but would have still been in use by the 1960s. This not only has a telephone receiver, but also a Morse key. So it would have made sense for a railroad-operated shelter to use something like this. Now, a couple of other details to point out here. We have a standard naphtha stove with a kettle. We have some cups. We have a pencil dosimeter and charger, which the volunteers would have used to monitor their cumulative radiation exposure. There would have been a curtain rod back here with an asbestos curtain covering the entrance to the shaft, and this would have been to prevent fallout from getting into the shelter and allowed you to use the bottom of the shaft as a decontamination airlock. We also have some naphthalene lamps here for illumination. Now, this is also a bit of an educated guess on my part because although these shelters came equipped with conduits for electrical cables, presumably for the telephone, for the remote monitoring radiac meter, and for running the air pump and some electric lights, I never found any brackets for electric lights in any of these shelters, nor any diagrams indicating how they were meant to be installed. So instead, because naphthalene lanterns were included in the equipment list for these shelters, I decided to light our shelter with these lamps, only rewired to take LED lights instead of actually burning gas. And then finally, you're probably wondering, well, how did the volunteers go to the washroom? Well, the answer is using that. That is a standard military issue chemical toilet. Another educated guess of sorts, the equipment lists for these shelters didn't indicate what specific model of chemical toilet was to be used, but I managed to obtain that one from Air Force Heritage. That is actually the toilet out of a Beach Expediter, which was used at the time as a training aircraft for navigators. So I figured that's probably close enough to what they would have used for these types of shelters. And so that is a brief overview of all the progress that we've made for this shelter and what it's going to look like when it finally opens. As I said, we have a couple of things left to do, mainly building up the mound that will encase the shelter and make it a true underground experience. But that's not a lot of work, all things considered. Hopefully, we'll be able to open up the shelter to the public early next summer, and it will be a one-of-a-kind exhibit. There are no other FRPs on display like this anywhere across Canada, so I'm very, very excited for that. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time with more updates on this project, as well as other regular videos on various fascinating devices. Until then, I'm Jean Messier from Our Own Devices. Have a great day.